Hello and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Uzeka.
And I'm Andres Lorente, and on the Two Real Cinema Club, each episode we watch two films, so usually one old and one new, and we make some comparisons between them. And this week we are discussing Beau Is Afraid.
Beau Is Afraid. 2023,
and also comparing that to Forrest Gump, which is 1990... something. 94.
Oh my God. I was trying to think this week of a little, you know how I love an analogy. I was trying to think of an analogy this week. And I've decided, I think basically we're like a book club, but a book club where you don't read the book and instead, so like you watch the film to catch up because you didn't read the book in time. And then after you see the film, you worry that maybe you watched the wrong film or something with like a similar title. So then you scour the internet for a similar film just in case. And then you watch that and then you start mixing up the two films in your mind. You can't figure out which film is which. And then when you finally come to the group, you've somehow mingled the two films together inextricably. It's all that, but a podcast.
In a podcast. Wow. So it's like reading the Spark Notes to two different books, trying to get through a class in high school or something like that.
It's like a William Burroughs cut-up of the Spark Notes, isn't it? Yeah. Or it's like you dropped water on the Spark Notes and the pages stuck together so the ink ran and you can't figure out whether it's Jane Eyre or whether it's Tale of Two Cities.
Oh, sounds messy. Very messy. That's what we are.
That's what we are, yeah.
God, I wish there had been a film adaptation of A Tale of Two Cities back in high school. I would have. Or even Great Expectations. I found the Dickens hard to get through. It's just so long.
There is a film of Great Expectations, isn't there? There's like the Alec Guinness film, isn't there?
Yeah.
But either you went to high school a lot earlier than I realised, and that hadn't been made at that point.
80s.
Or because it was black and white, it was off the table.
I managed to get through Great Expectations, but there is the film with Ethan Hawke from 98 or something like that.
Oh.
And that had Bob De Niro. Robert De Niro was in it.
That's quality casting. Let's do the socials, because we're supposed to do the socials at the top. So you can follow us on Twitter at Two Real Cine Club at twitter.com. You can find us on Instagram, Two Real Cinema Club, and at Instagram.com, where I've started posting slightly dumb jokes about the films that we're covering. You can read the blog at tworealcinemaclub.com. We try to put something up every week on the blog besides the show. You can email us. Please remind us that we exist. You can contact us at tworealcinemaclub@gmail.com. And finally, please tell your friends. Leave a review if you can bear it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. And we're on YouTube as well, the world's #1 audio supplier. So we are everywhere. Please come and let us know that you're listening.
If you don't get an email, does that mean you don't exist?
That's how I feel. If an email arrives in the forest and there's no tree to pick it up, does that mean, does the email happen?
Still looking for some good emails at tworealcinemaclub@gmail.com. Our spam protection over there is phenomenal. I can say that much, but I'd like to hear from more real people, please. So you were talking about a book club earlier, and when you're writing book reports and such, you're supposed to cite your sources, and I feel like I need to cite my sources before I'm expelled from this podcast.
Is this corrections? This is the corrections section.
It's sort of a corrections, yeah. It's that part where you either got those little small numbers in superscript, is that a 1 or a 2 and 3, and then you've got the footnote down below, or some kind of asterisk or parentheses at use for just acknowledging that there's some smarter people out there than you, and that you've got to say when you've used their material. And on the popcorn counter, last week when we were talking about sort of urban living and such, I had just been listening to some podcasts about exactly that. So I listened to something from the architectural historian Thomas DiGiovanni. He was working on some history of the Curtis Building, which is a famous building that housed a publishing company in Philadelphia. And I had listened to his podcast, which is called If You Lick It, It Will Kill You. Clever name, but I did want to mention that. And then also I was lucky enough to talk with, well, by chance, one of the architects who redesigned that building in the 80s, Theodore Oldham. So he was talking to me a little bit. I was in Cleveland. We were talking about like transforming buildings into multi-use facilities, sort of living and commercial space, these skyscrapers that are starting to go empty. So I did have some things in my arsenal that I was using from these conversations or these podcasts. So I just want to cite those two sources and shout out to them for allowing me to share their knowledge.
Citations provided. By an amazing coincidence, If You Lick It, It Will Kill You was on the shortlist for names for this podcast, wasn't it? It was, yes. We nearly called our podcast. I think
we felt it was a bit too controversial somehow.
Just too on the nose, really, yeah.
But DiGiovanni's braver than we are, for sure. So look for his podcast. Look, it's going to be a deep dive. You got to find it out there. But If You Lick It, It Will Kill You. But that's not what we're talking about today. What are we talking about today?
Well, I kind of want to ask you, what the hell did I watch this week? Oh, my God. We watched Beau Is Afraid, the new Ari Aster movie, and I did feel like if I had licked any part of that film, it certainly would have killed me.
Lethal. Absolutely lethal,
oh,
yes.
My goodness me. Yes, what an assault on the senses, and not a short assault either. I've been bludgeoned not just by the visual stimulation, but by the sheer blooming length. Shall I tell you the story of Beau Is Afraid, the new film from Ari Aster? Let me tell you the story.
That's a rhetorical question, because I was going to say no. Don't tell me the story. But go ahead. Yes, of course. For the
Do
listener,
you have 3
please.
hours to spare? So, Ari Aster, who made Hereditary and Midsommar, neither of which I've seen. This is his biggest film ever, coming in with a budget of $35 million. Joaquin Phoenix stars, and he plays Beau, the titular character. He's a middle-aged man. He lives alone in a tiny apartment in a rundown building in the absolute worst part of town, like a place where vagrants murder each other on his actual literal doorstep. He sees his therapist. He's taking medication for anxiety. He's due to visit his mother on the anniversary of his father's death. But when his suitcase and his keys are stolen just as he sets off, he's afraid to leave his apartment at all, much to his mother's deeply expressed disappointment. And when he finally must venture out to get water to take his prescription drugs, he leaves the door ajar and what looks like 100 homeless people move into the apartment, wrecking the place. When he calls his mother to explain what happened, the phone is answered by a delivery man who says that he has just found his mother's dead body. And so begins a lengthy, surreal, violent, dream-like road movie that sees Beau attacked, assaulted, traumatized in 24 different ways as he struggles to make it to his mother's funeral, where another devastating revelation awaits.
Ooh.
Did I get enough in? Was that nearly 3 hours?
No, not nearly. Oh,
I skipped out a lot in the middle there.
You did. That was mercifully short, and you left me on a cliffhanger. Something else happened.
I hope this isn't like the book club thing where I worry that we've seen 2 different films called Beau Is Afraid. Although to be fair, you could have split it up into 2 films. You could have split it up into 3 films. This film is really long, isn't it? It's really, really long.
Yeah, what was the running time? 240 or something like that?
No, it's long. It's 3 hours.
Is it 3 hours?
It is 3. I think it's 178 minutes, so it's 2 minutes short of 3 hours. It's unnecessarily long, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It made a big impression of me, but there is a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it's we'll talk about it in general terms before we ring the spoiler bell, but it is very episodic, isn't it? It's like a series of dream-like skits.
Yeah.
And when I got to the end and I thought, well, especially that middle section, those kind of dreamlike moments could largely have been presented in any order. They could have been shuffled and the film would have been basically the same.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I didn't know until this afternoon, it's based on an original 6-minute short film that Ari Aster made 12 years ago. You can't see it, but you can see little kind of clips and excerpts from it on YouTube. So I watched little bits. And the 6-minute short movie is basically the first hour of Beau Is Afraid, but compressed into 6 minutes.
Wow!
But it does ask the question. So if you're able to accomplish all that in 6 minutes, why is this film 3 hours long now?
Yeah, you're kind of going in the wrong direction in terms of film. You'd think you'd want to be able to tell the story faster. Oh, so 6 minutes is what is that? 1/30 of Beau Is Afraid, something like that. Now you tell me. Now
we're talking.
Save me an hour. Yeah, it's not short, and it's the thing is, it's not only is it not short, it's like an hour and a half too long.
Yeah.
At least an hour. So there's a lot to be cut. And you're right. I think as a result, I stopped losing any sense of it whatsoever because it is very episodic. It's not like one whole story or something really like zeroing in on one concise thing. It's just jamming a whole lot in. And then there's this whole theater scene in the middle that takes up probably 30 or 40 minutes to tell us things that aren't even necessarily true in the story, which we can go into in depth later if we want to. I think you could, but as you said, you could dismiss a whole lot of this, just edit it right out, and it really wouldn't change the quality of the film.
I mean, there's lots of little episodes. Things occur, and I think a lot of the individual scenes are often great. I mean, there are terrifying moments filled with kind of dread and apprehension, which I think is the thing that he does very well. It's Lynchian, isn't it? It's this dream-like Lynchian fugue, but because it's so episodic, it just, like you said, it doesn't really flow together as a story any more than a dream does. It's like dream logic. It's very dreamlike, and it's like when you reach the end of a dream and you wake up in the morning and you recall like a series of vivid, moving images. But the story of your dream is, you try and relate it to somebody over breakfast, and you realize you're just telling them, well, this happened, and then that happened, and then this turned into that, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then I woke up. And this has much the same feel. I'm not against movies feeling like dreams. This is one of the central precepts that they emphasized on the screenwriting course where you and I met, was that cinema is dreaming.
Yep.
But this has not just the creativity and the unhinged aspect of dreaming, but also the sheer failure of logic of dreaming as well. I mean, I'm sure that was probably the intention, but I'm not sure that it entirely works.
You need terra firma somewhere. I think that's what the problem is here. And I think on the page it would seem dreamlike and incomprehensible, but then you get to the director's level, and I think he's a little too freeform in this, and we can talk about who had final cut on this film. Yeah. But then also I think the character himself, he has a brain injury at one point, he's not taking his medication, so that's not firm either. So there's nothing firm because we don't know what Beau's experiencing and how his current conditions, whether it's the head injury, whether it's he's not taking his medicine the way he should, or anything else. We don't really have anything firm. There's nothing we can really lean on and say, okay, this is definitely happening, because I wasn't sure what was really happening and what was in his imagination. I wasn't sure if this was an analysis or a study of mental illness or paranoid schizophrenia or something like that. So as a result, there was nothing you could really grasp onto as a viewer. So there's viewer confusion, there's protagonist confusion. I think there's a lot of director confusion in here, and I think there's a script where he probably just literally shat out whatever he wanted to do, and then it was someone gave him some money to make the film. So $35 million is a lot of money.
Do you think it's possible that he dropped the script on the way to the set, and then just reassembled the pages in a random order?
Sounds like your book club, doesn't it? See? This is a book club.
Should we ring the spoiler bell so we can talk about some of the juicier bits?
This film was already spoiled before that damn bell rang. Yeah,
we should. This is my favorite bit. I love this. Whether it's necessary or not. I'll ring the bell. Let me get the hammer. Wait a second. Okay. Oh, that's loud, isn't it?
Well, it'll help us meditate, though.
My head's ringing. Okay, I will confess, I did enjoy this film. Enjoy maybe isn't quite the right word. I certainly, I felt like I had really experienced something. I didn't come away from this film feeling, meh, didn't move me. It did move me, maybe in ways I didn't particularly want to feel moved. But if I have one central complaint about it, it's that there's something about the film's title, that Beau Is Afraid, which somehow seems to, wants to beg you to imagine that his fear is unnecessary. Like just writing that he is afraid in the title seems to imply that his fear is probably silly, or his fear is unfounded. But I got to the end of the film and I thought, well, you blooming out, Beau, you have every right to be afraid because all the things that happen to you are genuinely terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Ari Aster is just great at identifying things that discomfort the viewer. There's so many things that really made me cruel. It was like a warning sign very, very early on when in his apartment on the door, the landlord has put spider warning posters.
Yeah.
And it just got worse from there. The kind of moments of sheer nightmarish terror, the man hiding in the ceiling. Right at the end of the movie, spoiler, sorry, the giant penis monster in the attic. The unstoppable kind of Terminator-like kind of deranged ex-soldier chasing Beau with a machine gun.
Jeeves, right?
Yeah, Jeeves, that's his name. Yes, just brilliant name. Ask Jeeves. Like just the sheer volume of stabbings, the bleeding, getting crushed by the wheels of the food truck. I mean, this is pure horror. God no wonder he's afraid. I was.
But is it a critique of American life and American society today, or is it some sort of, as I said, study of mental illness? Because when you say afraid, I think paranoid, and there's a lot of paranoia in this film. But I don't know that that's really even the subject of the film. I don't know if that's what Aster's trying to look at and study and put on screen.
I mean, paranoia is when you believe everyone around you has got a gun, or they're trying to murder you in your sleep. Whereas within the world of the film, everybody does have a gun, and everyone really is trying to murder Beau in his sleep.
Exactly.
I realise it's a very subjective viewpoint. There isn't a scene really without Beau in it. It's very much a POV kind of movie. But for you to make a film about paranoia, I think you need to demonstrate that there is like you say, there is a real world, there is a solid earth somewhere where you can judge how far you have let your paranoia take you. Whereas we see the film entirely in Beau's shoes, so it's difficult to say he's paranoid when he's clearly just in the firing line.
You do see it, and the trailer and even the advertisements make it clear that you're sort of seeing it from different ages for Beau. Differently, you have the teen story when he's on the cruise with his mother. You see him older when he's had children that maybe he had or did not have. So you see him at different ages, sort of having the same kinds of experiences. But I think you're supposed to get some of that fear from his mother. Obviously, I think she instills a lot of fear in him and anxiety in him. And ultimately, this is a tale about him trying to get back to his mother. So I don't know that makes any difference, though, that he's always been this way. And then again, he's the opening scene, he's with a psychiatrist who's giving him a new medication. So we know that he's on a medication. We know that he's trying to get back to his mother, which is sort of a difficult thing for him, regardless of what age he's been. I think he's had a tenuous relationship with his mother. And for me, I was grabbing for themes the whole time I was watching this and thinking about it afterwards and trying to figure out what this is about. And the biggest thing for me was how our parents mess us up, basically. And I think that's the only thing I came to. There was no. Remember his father? Doesn't his father die during his conception? Something like that.
Yes,
right?
Well, reputedly, yes.
Yeah. So this is what we heard anyway, and it's an explanation for why the father's not on the scene and why he's not running home to his parents or going to see his father or anything like that. It's strictly a mother mission. So we know that he's not part of the picture, and then the mother sort of messes up his relationships with women early on, it seems like, by commenting or getting too close, I think, and then intervening in this relationship. He sort of starts with Elaine, who comes back to us much later, on a cruise ship when they're teenagers. And then I think maybe if we try and work a little chronologically, we might talk about ways that she continues to sort of mess with his head as she goes along, including faking her own death, apparently.
Yes.
So to me, the biggest theme that came through for me was our parents just mess us up, and that was all I got. I mean, I reaching and grasping and couldn't get much more than that. So maybe I missed a whole lot, and the 3 hours was much too much for me. And there were some moments that I thought were kind of visually humorous, or I enjoyed a little bit, but I really found the whole film so tedious that I couldn't say that I really enjoyed it as a whole.
I came away feeling that I think the main takeaway I had was that Ari Aster has recently finished reading a book about Freud.
Yeah,
because it feels like this is Freud writ large. I mean, it has a literal penis monster, isn't it? Beau thinks that he will die if he has sex because he's told that his father died. The first time he had sex, and
that's right.
His father's father died the first time he had sex. Beau gets he gets penetrated, doesn't he? Like again and again by long, thin, sharp objects. He's stabbed and poked, and the other thing is he encounters his mother like in many forms. I feel like pretty much every woman he meets in the film actually kind of is his mother. Mm-hmm. So we meet his actual mother towards the end of the film, but also the doctor's wife who runs him over and then takes care of him, kind of mothers him. The pregnant actor that he meets like in the Forrest acting troupe. She like cleans his wounds. She's like his mother. And then like the doctor's daughter, who's the one whose room he steals, she screams at him and manipulates him like his mother. Then there's a fake mother in the coffin when he turns up to having missed the funeral, and then finally at the very end when he meets the adult Elaine, and she's like this kind of proxy mother, and he has sex with her in his mother's bed. It's almost like it's a film with just two characters. It's Beau and his mother, but the mother is seen through 100 broken mirrors.
Yeah. So I did wonder, is this an Oedipus film? I mean,
isn't it?
I think there's a massive Oedipus thing going on here, but it's not that clear, and maybe it's supposed to be subliminal, and it's not supposed to be clear. But you're definitely right. I mean, all those female characters all seem like they all sort of look like the mother character too. There's not a lot of differentiation in the women, I guess. I
mean, I think Ari Aster, he likes to make films about weird families, and and there's a great kind of seam of gold to mine there. Audiences want to see films about weird, messed up families. I think there's a niche for that.
Yeah.
All I would say is, I don't know what Ari Aster's own upbringing was like, but I'll tell you, if he invites me to his parents' house for Christmas, I am saying no.
Good. Oh, good. Be firm. Be strong. Yes. I agree with you there. There's the testicle stuff and the penis thing. I think we should talk about that a little bit. I feel safe in your hands as a doctor and all that, so I think it's okay to talk about that. But if you're going to put a big penis and massive testicles in an attic as a climactic scene, I think it needs to be earned a little bit more. It just felt like it was thrown in there. It's a little surprising. There is this talk about is it a distended testicle? What's the right word there?
Apparently, I think so, or like a swollen testicle. He's like a testicular hematoma or something, doesn't he? Or something the doctor says,
So Nathan Lane's surgeon character mentions that early on. He's just taken him back to his house and practiced medicine on him and told him about his testicle. And then you see the testicle when he's finally having sex in his mother's bed. That's one of the clever things in the whole film. But that's it. You get those two moments, and then all of a sudden, a big penis and big testicles. And I don't know how CGI that was or not, but it was impressive.
But it was dark, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was dark, but it didn't seem earned. And I'm not sure if it was a massive latex construction or not, but I thought, for me, that was a bit over the top. It reminded me, oh God, who's the great English? I don't know if he's the English director, Ken. Oh God, who did stuff like that? Oh God,
Ken Loach. Yeah, he's full of that.
No, Ken Loach. It'll come back to me. Ken Russell.
Ken Russell.
Yeah. Ken Russell. It was a total Ken Russell moment, and I thought, I don't know if you've earned that. It just seems like if you're going to put that in there, you've got to build it up a little bit more. But then the other thing was the fact that. You're right. He was afraid to have sex because he thought he was going to die. And apparently this was his first sexual encounter in his life. And then Parker Posey's there, and this is the adult Elaine who's sort of being manipulated by his mother to try and get Beau to come back home. He starts seeing her on TV, that Elaine now works for the mother. And so he wants to be with Elaine. They end up having sex. And then she dies, right? She's the one who dies, not Beau. But I got to ask you again, medically, rigor mortis came in really fast on Parker Posey there.
I did not understand what was going on there. When that happened, I thought somehow I thought it was like there was a bit of a reveal, and it turned out that Parker Posey's character was actually a doll and not a real person. That's what I presumed it was, but I don't think so. I think some servants come in and they carry her away, and she is stiff as a board. And I did not really understand what was going on there, and I put it down to dream logic again as well.
So what I think happens is I think there's this massive Deus Ex Machina, but it's actually kind of it's more obvious in the sense that his mother seemingly has put all these things together to get him to come home. She's hired Elaine or gotten her to work for her and even sacrificed her life for her. There's all these contrivances to get Beau back home, and it seems like his mother's been pulling these strings all along, and she's revealed as this very powerful woman. And I think what happens is at one point you see he's looking through all the, I don't know, there are all these sort of paintings and posters and things that he sees that have been laid out by the mourners as they've passed through the house. And not much is made of this, but it seems like she has profited off his life forever. Like she's the architect of this building where he lives in whatever city it was, which is, I don't know, to help people who need assisted living or something like that. She's developed for certain drugs, I think, to help those with some sort of mental illness. So it looks like every stage of her business career is based on some sort of need that Beau has, and even she almost even manipulates his life to the point where his needs are her creations, and then she makes these products or finds these solutions that earn her money. And that is, it's never said, it's never stated. You have to really look at the layouts in front of you, all these posters and things. And that's what I got out of it. And for me, that was really, really interesting, but it was just a throwaway piece. I thought, how crazy is it that she would invent things or put her son through things that means he ends up with these conditions that need some sort of solution, and that she can make money off of the solution. I thought that was brilliant, and I don't think that's even in the film. I think that was in my imagination. And as you said before, you don't know what's real, what's a dream at one point. So but that's what I saw. There were these magazine articles and write-ups that showed what these things that she had done or these businesses that she'd started, and there's a clear picture of the apartment building where he lives, and she was the architect or one of the funders on the project. It's a really interesting note, and of all the things to edit out, it feels like everything that had to do with that story beat or that fact that we needed was edited out in favor of the big penis in the attic with the testicles.
I saw that moment when you get this... this slow pan across the wall with photographs of all of her achievements. Yeah. I interpreted that as the film telling us that the mother had cared for Beau all this time. Ooh. That even though she appeared distant and aggressive and unpleasant, actually he was constantly in her thoughts and everything she did in her life was to protect him or to help him. Although that doesn't match up with anything else we learned about her character.
Yeah. And I think she's actually an evil character, so I couldn't interpret it that way.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And one reason I say that is I think it's sort of an Andy Warhol like painting or portrait of her, but it's made up of all these other faces.
Yeah.
And if you look at those faces, Nathan Lane is in there. All the characters that he's encountered on the trip home, all those faces are in there. So it's almost as if she's used these people to get to Beau and to give him one last, condition that needs to be repaired under her watch or something like that. So, and as I said, that for me, I think that's a great idea. And in the hands of a different filmmaker who actually paid attention to that and really drew our attention to it and revealed that as the story, I think that would have been great. But as a result, I was walking home after this film and just thinking, I think this is mostly about how our parents mess us up, and this mother in particular, is really not a very good person, and she's really screwed up Beau. That's about all I got. I think
you've sort of cut to one of my other main complaints about the film, which is that it features a protagonist, basically has no agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think this might possibly be at the core of the shortcomings of the story, basically because Beau is the main character in the film. The film is named after him, but he doesn't do anything really. Mm-hmm. Things happen to him. He's not the protagonist; he's the victim.
Yeah,
I'm struggling to think of a decision that he takes or a choice he makes on his own. Does he take a single decision all the way through the film? Basically, he does what he's told, unless he physically can't face doing it. But otherwise, he's given instructions by people on screen, and he acts them out. They tell him, take the pills. The girls tell him, smoke the joint. The wife says, watch the TV. The girlfriend says, take off your clothes. He's given instructions and he follows them. He's a puppet right to the very, very end of the film. When in the very last scene, he is chained to a boat. The boat capsizes. He dies with it. He's simply pulled along on some kind of chain or string all the way through. Is he really a protagonist at all? It may be his story, but I'm not sure that he has any active part in it.
Yeah, this is more an antagonist story, I think, and it's sort of an unseen antagonist, which makes you think it's kind of a psychological thing, because his mother is really the antagonist, but she's so in his psyche that he's fearing all these things. He's going through all of this, ends up in this sort of it's like a psychological sports stadium with a lake in it, right? And they're all watching, and he's on trial for who knows what. And I guess he never really drowns. You don't see it, but presumably that's what's going to happen. As the credits start to roll, he's in a very bad position. He's not going to survive his trauma.
This week's understatement.
Yeah.
He is in a bad position. You're right. Yeah.
He's in a very bad. You thought he was in bad straits earlier on when he's got 100 people living in his apartment and destroying it, and he can't get to his medication.
At least he could breathe then.
I think, in terms of agency, you're right. He has very little. There's one scene where he sort of escapes the suburbia only to be discovered by the what are they called? The Orphans of the Woods or something like that? I don't know what yeah. Who are this acting troupe that reenacts his life. That's a very odd scene, too, because it pre-tells and retells. It sort of tells you what you're about to see, and it's already kind of things that we sort of known or he's talked about or hinted at, where he has this family all of a sudden. He has this other life that I guess would be his dream life, maybe raising sons, but there's no mother in the picture or something like that, which again pointed me towards, okay, this is kind of an Oedipus thing, where he doesn't really love his mother, though. That's the funny thing. He's not, you feel like he doesn't want to go home. That's in the early episodes with the psychiatrist, he's putting up all these sort of these shields and these barriers. I'm not going to do it home. I can't do it. And there's talk of how he hasn't been able to go home in the past and all that. So I don't think he really wants to get there. And maybe he knows that he's going to die. Maybe it's a psychological death that he's dying. It's really not, again, it's not that clear. I mean, because I don't believe the psychological courtroom and the stadium and all that and the lake. I don't think that actually happens. So it's almost as if, is something psychologically dying with him, or is it really his mother has just set up this very elaborate end game for him? I don't know.
I must say, for all my confusion and misgivings about the film, I still came away glad that I had seen it. There are a bunch of great scenes in this film, and I was genuinely terrified many times. We've already mentioned the man on the ceiling, like the scary naked knife murderer. Yeah, maybe my favourite scene in the whole movie. This brief scene where he finds that life in the doctor's house is being recorded by CCTV, and he briefly rewinds the camera to see what he's just done, and then he forward winds the footage, and he gets these kind of quick little glimpses of the future. It's like something straight out of David Lynch.
A lot
of these elements, they're just kind of great, but they just don't gel into a whole movie. Yeah. And in the end, I came away thinking the whole thing is a bit like Monty Python's Meaning of Life. It's like there's a bunch of well-executed sketches, and there are some thematic links, but it's not a story.
Yeah.
Meaning of Life is a fun film, but it's the weakest Monty Python film, and it's the weakest for a reason. It doesn't kind of gel together. It's just a whole bunch of bits and bobs stitched together.
Yeah. I think you're onto something there. I mean, there are some. That's why it's frustrating. This is a frustrating film because good money went into it, good imagination went into it, and yet it doesn't hang together very well. And I felt like I was watching a bad Charlie Kaufman film on this stuff, because he's at least normally coherent. I think his last film was not very coherent, but there's normally a bit more coherence in his scripts, and there's some things that you can take away from it. There's some depth of thought, whereas I felt like this was just a bunch of kind of cool images or cool ideas pasted onto a storyboard somewhere and then shot. And I kept thinking about you were talking a few pods back about a certain day of shooting could be $1 million easily. And I just thought about some of those street scenes early in the film, which are really impressive. It gets off to a pretty good start setting up the story world, but we abandon that story world entirely within about 25 minutes or something. But some of those scenes must have been super expensive, and I just don't know that they really push the story forward, because those scenes give us very real reason to feel his fear, his paranoia. But the later scenes, it just starts to get kind of weird. By the time you're in the forest for 30 minutes, probably 40 minutes, you feel like you're watching this whole other film. There's animation in there.
Yeah, completely.
And Beau is getting a new life at that point, too. And it just seems like, okay, he's escaped from suburbia. So now this is the life that Beau really imagines himself having. And then he gets disrupted once more. And he ends up getting home really easily. Someone just picks him up and drives him 20 minutes or something like that. So it's not like he's covering this massive distance but he has to go through a whole lot of crap to get to that point. But I think this is a film where no producers kind of reined it in, and the editor did not have final say on what this film looked like. I imagine this is a director's film, and this is what he wanted us to see, so we've got to accept it as it is.
Take it as it is. I tell you, there's one group of people who won't take things as they are. People who will step in and set things right. Should we phone the Cliche Squad?
Yeah, I think so.
Cliche Squad.
Any particular charges you would like the Cliche Squad to prosecute this week? Because I've written some down in my my police notebook here.
I gotta say that. Yeah, I'm just gonna. I think you should do most of the work here because it's been a month, I think, since I've seen this film, and I've been working actively to sort of block it out of my memory. I'm a little disappointed by the penis and testicle stuff. I guess I've already gone off on it, so I mean, I won't belabor it. But we very often see the penises and the testicles in these ways. I mean, in these ways where it's just sort of this massive thing. It's all latex and it's all scary, and I think that's something that we see too often. Didn't we in Everyone Everywhere All at Once? Didn't we see a lot of phalluses? I guess
it was a lot of dildos in that film.
And they were all scary. And I get it, but it's not. It doesn't have to be weapons. It seems like most of the time the male genitalia is used as weapons in films or metaphorically as weapons. And I get it. It's probably true in a real sense.
But we've seen it a lot now, haven't we?
We've seen a lot, and in this film, it just wasn't earned to me. I think it was probably just a big symbol for how Freudian the whole thing was. But that's where I'll start. I'm going to leave it be. I've said my piece, so let's move on.
I've made some little notes in my book. Frightening, scary, willful teenage girls.
Yeah.
I feel like they're kind of stock characters that I've seen many, many times before. These kind of self-possessed, demanding, mercurial, scary teenage girls.
Yep.
And here, so there's like the daughter whose room Beau takes, and she isn't really a character. She's like just this stock type used for impact. She's got no story of her own, and then kind of like suddenly she takes her own life right on screen. For kind of like for sort of no reason. It's like not the act of a genuine character. She's just like she's a bit of the furniture, basically. So yeah, I've seen those characters too much.
That was with all the paint too. There was all that paint, if you remember. That was just nonsense.
And scary homeless people. Another one I've put. I mean, that's straight out of the David Lynch playbook, isn't it? But scary hobo.
And they were very scary. They were.
I feel like I've seen that in a lot of films.
Yeah,
and also this absolute initial Act 1 inciting incident, the new medication that seems to kickstart a hallucinatory descent into madness.
Yes.
This has been the central leading plot point for an awful lot of films, and it's happening again now. It is happening again. Yeah. So I do feel like many of these elements, we've seen them before. They've kind of become cliches. Yeah. The number of times that I've seen that little scene where the doctor writes a prescription and hands it over.
Sure. You
kind of think, okay, it's that scene again.
And very often the handwriting's not very clear. Doctors having bad handwriting is oof.
Oh, but that's true.
And I've seen your script, James. It's perfectly fine in your case. You would never. I think the popcorn counter, some of your points a week ago kind of presaged all this in terms of the city as being an inherently dangerous place.
Yeah.
I think this film has a pretty good balance in the sense that the suburbs were equally scary. But I think the real madness, I was scared in the movie theater watching those scenes that take place at the very beginning in the city. So I think, urban living as being inherently dangerous and dirty. I think that's definitely in there.
I will say it again. I'm glad that I saw this film. I kind of enjoyed it, but I could have done with about 50% of the runtime.
Yeah.
And probably with 50% of the runtime, I think everyone would have enjoyed it a lot more. Yeah.
I think, 6 minutes you said was the first hour. This could have been a great 18-minute film. I would have done 3 of the 6-minute films with a really classic structure. This one needed structure. Beginning, middle, and end, and all that stuff. 18 minutes.
18 minutes, this would have been dynamite.
Would have been great.
Right, let's have a break.
Yeah.
And then we will come back and talk about another bizarre, hallucinatory David Lynchian nightmare, Forrest Gump from 1994. We're proud this episode to be sponsored by TRC Air, the new budget airline that's offering tickets to premium destinations for $1. That's right, $1. Fly to Los Angeles for $1. New York for $1. London for $1. Singapore for $1. It's just a $1 ticket, plus a small number of fees and taxes. If you want to bring a bag, it's $60, but you can fly with no luggage for a fee of just $54. Meals are charged at $35 each, or you can bring your own food and pay $35 per person, or eat nothing for a small hunger charge of $42. Passengers must pay a mandatory seatbelt fee of $22 per seat, a headrest supplement of $18, a cushion fee of $13, an armrest charge of $42.50 per arm. Armrests cannot be shared. All passengers must pay extra if they want the plane to take off or utilize its wings, fuselage, or fuel tanks at any point during the flight. Passengers wishing to board the plane must pay a local boarding fee. Passengers wishing to disembark the plane at any point must pay an exit supplement at their destination. Onboard films are charged at $16 each, even if you only glimpse one by accident on someone else's screen. All passengers must pay the standard air fee of $118 if they wish to breathe air during their flight. Passengers wishing to bring their own air must also pay an additional cylinder supplement of $109 and an oxygen mask fee of $19. Passengers wishing to hold their breath for the duration of the flight will have to pay a standard discomfort fee of $114. TRC Air. Travel the world for just $1. See website for terms and conditions at www.howmuchyourkidding.com.
Oddly enough, I stopped breathing during that. I started coughing.
With the hope of saving $16.
Well, exactly. And we are back. My voice is not entirely back, but we're going to
80% back.
We're going to sally forth all the same with Forrest Gump from 1994, big Tom Hanks vehicle that also stars Sally Field and Robin Wright.
Yeah.
Directed by Bob Zemeckis and written by Eric Roth.
Yeah.
He's got quite a resume as a screenwriter. Very interesting, and it goes back into the early 70s or so. So he's about halfway into his career by 1994, and he knows how to write a script, clearly. And from a novel, I've never heard of the novel, written by Winston Groom is what I wrote down. So.
Yeah. I did the kind of the studious thing of get hold of the novel before the pod, but I haven't read it yet. I think it's quite short, but I haven't.
Oh, really?
There you are. I'm wasting my breath. So why did I interject to say that? That brings nothing.
Because you should just start a book club. We keep talking about book club.
It's a real book club.
You're always reading the books.
To Eric Roth, interestingly, I mean, still working now. He wrote the script for Dune, didn't he?
That's right. Well, that's right. Yeah, we talked about him a little bit when we talked about Dune, and we think he may have doctored it. I don't remember what our final consensus was, but we talked about it a little bit. This takes place really in the America of the mostly 60s, 70s, and 80s. It opens with Forrest Gump on a park bench.
Oh, wait a second. Before we get to the synopsis.
Pardon me?
Before we get to the synopsis.
Oh, yeah. Uh-oh.
There's more. There's more. You have to tell me because this is so great. So you chose the like the backup film this week. You chose the second movie. Yeah. But I'm going to get to tell you to tell me why.
Oh gosh, that's right. Why?
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
I think I looked at the trailer for Beau Is Afraid. I knew he was going home to mother. And I think that was already in the back of my head. I'm going to make an argument that at least one of these films is a magically real film. I think there's magical realism in both of these films. I think they both attempt it, and I think one of them accomplishes it better than the other one. I just think you could tell that it was a very unreal film. So it's basically, I would make a choice of the old film based on, of course, what we're seeing as the new film. And it reminded me just enough where I thought, okay, Forrest Gump is the way to go. And Forrest Gump is one of these films that I'm not sure I saw in the theater, and I'm not sure I've ever sat down and watched the whole thing. It's one of these things that you see on cable, and I've pieced it together over the years by seeing maybe the end first and then the beginning and seeing the middle after that. But this time I did sit down, and as you said, it's 2 hours, 20 minutes. So it is a longer film, but I watched it straight through and I don't regret it. But this is also like a commercially successful film, and sometimes we watch those, but not a whole lot, honestly. We haven't seen that many just absolute hits, surefire hits. I think it's
made a lot of money, didn't it? It was $677 million gross, I think, which is what I wrote down in my notes, which is, in 1994, that was a lot of money.
Yeah. And I understand why people see it, honestly. This is a good film. It is a good film.
I won't interrupt anymore. Tell us the story. Then.
You can interrupt. My voice is not that strong, so interrupt away.
Whisper the story.
I'll whisper a story to you. Forrest Gump sits on a park bench. This is that classic scene that's probably been copied in comedy sketches for years. He's in Savannah, Georgia, waiting for a bus in what is very much 1981. That's made very clear to us. And sitting next to him is this suitcase of life's sort of souvenirs and keepsakes. It doesn't make sense as a traveling piece of luggage, but for storytelling, it's perfect. And while he's waiting for a bus, he tells his life stories to anyone who sits beside him. There's the very on-the-nose thematic statement early on. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. You know what this film is about kind of immediately. So it's just classic early opening 5 pages. The theme statement is just spoken, in this case, by the protagonist. Yep. What ensues is, and that's a bit of wisdom that he learned from his mother. He says, my mother used to always say this. What ensues is a sort of a lifetime of flashbacks that we see that he was unable to walk in early life. He wore these sort of leg braces, and his movements in the boarding house that his mother operated influenced Elvis, who once stayed at the boarding house to do his sort of dancing provocatively as if his knees, I guess, were in braces too. He befriends Jenny on the way to school one day. She sort of becomes his protector and hero, and they will be friends for life. She was from sort of an abusive household, and he was from a very loving household. Again, a single mother in her case, and in his case. I'm not sure for Jenny if we heard about her abusive father, but we don't know much about her mother. And the setup sort of answers this very easy to answer riddle of, is it better to have a doting mother or a careless father? I think based on Jenny and Forrest, we should all go for the doting mother. Jenny's story sort of entwines with Forrest's story over the years, though we understandably get a lot more from Forrest's perspective because it's really his story. He will play football for the University of Alabama because he runs so fast after leaving the leg braces far behind. This film sort of becomes the history of a man, but also the history of the country coming of age, too. That's the way I look at it. There's a lot of flashbacks of historical things in United States history. He enters the Army just in time for the Vietnam War. He meets a true comrade in Bubba. And at the same time, Jenny, we get the story of her sort of becoming an exotic dancer. He periodically emerges into her story when she's off at college or after college, and she's always trying to protect. He's always trying to protect her. She doesn't want his protection. Their lives sort of both parallel and intersect over the years and over the story. When Forrest is in Vietnam, Jenny kind of goes hippie, so they're sort of on opposite sides of the spectrum in a way. But Forrest ends up a hero in Vietnam. He rescues some 5 or 6 guys in his troop of soldiers, and his commander, Dan Taylor, who's played by Gary Sinise. But Bubba, who he has decided he would go into the shrimping business with after the war, dies, sadly. Taylor, that's Dan Taylor, his destiny is sort of to die on the battlefield. All of the men in his family have died in the big wars in the United States, and he's supposed to die there too. So he holds this grudge against Forrest because Forrest saves him and doesn't give him the honor of dying on the battlefield. So his story, Dan's story, doesn't end the way he wants it to, and Forrest is sort of constantly being rewritten. So we do get this wonderful contrast in their two life stories. Forrest sort of has this, he's limited. He doesn't think of himself as very smart. He probably has some learning disabilities, but he has this growth mindset. He'll just do things and say yes to things and get some experience out of them. So he's got this sort of elastic thinking, which really sharply contrasts to Taylor's rigidity.
That's why I've never heard it before. Elastic thinking.
Oh, I thought I've heard it, but I just wrote it down, but not knowing if I've heard it or not. Flexible thinking, something like that.
That's good. No, if I haven't heard it before, it doesn't mean it's not a thing. It just means I'm terribly ignorant and haven't come across it. Elastic thinking. I like that. It's good.
We should trademark it and make a podcast called Elastic Thinking. Quickly. Dump this podcast. Let's start the new one.
The Elastic Thinking podcast.
Forrest Gump becomes a ping pong champ, sort of international celebrity. He appears with John Lennon on the Dick Cavett show with some, ingenuity. What is the word? Ingenious filmmaking. They put him there. He helps solve the Watergate break-in and the conspiracy that happens there under the presidency of Richard Nixon. He meets 3 presidents in this film. Personally, I think Nixon he intertwines with. Kennedy and Johnson he meets through the magic of filmmaking. He goes into the shrimping business, ultimately makes millions, invests in Apple. So all of these things are happening in American history, and Forrest is perfectly placed in it. But then his personal story sort of takes over towards the later parts of the films. He becomes rich, but Mama's dying, so he goes back to Georgia. And again, in this film, there's this powerful metaphor of going back home and going back to Mother. And Jenny returns. And this film's a lot about cultural, what I would say, lodestones or stepping stones or touchstones, I guess is the word. I found it. I had to go through 3 stones to get to it. There's a lot. And for me, there are a couple of personal ones, too. There's this wonderful thing where I think Zemeckis quotes a painting by Andrew Wyeth called Christina's World, because when Jenny comes back to her rundown old house, she sort of looks at it with this distance and this disbelief that Wyeth captures in a painting. So that's there too. There are just all these wonderful things that sort of evoke Americana, I guess, throughout. So I'm going to be very interested in your take on some things too, because as a non-American, I think it might come off differently. But when Jenny comes back, they're happy. He proposes. She rejects him, but they have sex. And then she's gone. Reminded me a little bit about the Northman, because the Northman actually, if you remember, Northman has sex one time also.
Of all the films, I thought you were going to compare Forrest Gump to The Northman. Was not top of my list, actually.
Well, I'll get back to that later. But it's interesting that isn't that Forrest's first sexual encounter? We've seen Beau's first sexual encounter. And The Northman, jackpot, he had sex once on screen that we saw, I think, and he procreates just from that one encounter. So, I think I've blown the secret already. But Jenny escapes, and I have to mention this again because it's a touchstone for me. She leaves in this taxi. It's a station wagon that we had growing up.
Oh,
we all hated this car. This is the Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu Classic Wagon. We called it the Dirthmobile. It was terrible. One of my greatest memories is when my mother took her burro and shoved it into the back seat in a battle of 2 very stubborn souls. She got a burro into the back seat of the station wagon. He had to sort of, crunch down a little bit just to be in the car comfortably, and he was not comfortable. He actually shat a bunch, pissed in the back seat. We took him to some event where it was a burro, like a burro conference or something. I don't even know, a competition or something like that. And then I think my oldest brother, had a date in that same car later that night.
That night, right.
Yeah, and it didn't smell good. And fortunately, it was with a girl who owned horses, so I think she was used to the stench. But wow, we had that station wagon. We all hated it. And
it's been a while since we've had a good donkey story on the podcast as well.
There you go. We got the donkey
We're betraying our normal donkey-orientated programming.
Well, that's the most vivid memory of that animal, and I felt very sorry for it. But I was proud of my mother for getting it in there. It was amazing.
I honestly never knew what a station wagon was.
Oh.
Because in the UK, the word station and the word wagon, those both mean railway.
Oh,
I don't think I even really understood that a station wagon is a car.
Yeah, it's a car, yeah. That
explains a lot.
I don't know if it was trauma that came up or nostalgia, but when I saw that taxi take Jenny away, it struck me. So he, at that point though, Jenny's gone. And that's when Forrest starts running. This is another classic scene here where he runs across country a few times in Nike shoes. Again, the emerging cultural references, I think. So there are long acts of 2A and 2B with all these, sort of the premise of Forrest going through all these great experiences. But the final act is really quite short. I clocked it at about 20 minutes where Forrest finally leaves the park bench because he can walk to where Jenny is. He learns that, wait for it, Haley Joel Osment is the son who is young enough where he still sees live people. He doesn't say, I see dead people. He can actually see Forrest. That's his son.
Yeah.
It's Forrest Jr. And Forrest, one of the first things he says is one of the great lines. He says, is he smart or is he like me? So he's worried that he's, passed on his condition. His bit of parenthood would be jeopardizing this boy's happiness or success. But it was a great line. And then he sits down watching his TV and he meets his son. And so then we finally see this is Jenny's journey too. She has AIDS at this point. She's dying. Dying is a part of life. We get all that. We eventually see Forrest Sr., takes his son, Forrest Jr., to the bus. And there's an early scene where Forrest has a difficulty getting on the bus. Forrest Sr. does when he was that age. But young Forrest is a little different because his father is there for him. Like his father's right behind him and helping him get on the bus. And it's a nice moment. And that's more or less where it ends. So it's one man's journey, but I think it's a nation's journey too. And I think that's maybe why Americans really relate to this film. But as a non-American, what do you think?
So I, like you, had never seen this film all the way through, but I sort of felt like I had probably seen it in bits here and there and little snippets. And I was surprised to sit through the film with the family on a Saturday night and discover that all the things I knew about the film happened in the first half or the first hour. Yeah. So certainly the first half of the movie, that's the only thing I knew. The second half of the movie, I didn't know at all. But I came away thinking, basically the film, it is a version of the history of the US, like from the 1950s to the 1970s. But you know what? I hesitate to use this word. It's a boomer's version of that history, isn't it? Yeah. It strikes me as this is a conservative film. Yeah. It's a film where this film is in favor of the army and it's opposed to the counterculture. As far as this film is concerned, things like the music of the 70s, hippies, the anti-war movement, the Black Panthers, all of them are worthless as far as this film is concerned. But the army, the White House, college football, well-manicured lawns, these things are good. I came away at the end, and in the second half of the movie, Forrest is wearing this red baseball hat, and I was seriously thinking, is that what the MAGA hat is based on? Is the MAGA hat basically a reference to the Bubba Gump shrimp hat that Forrest Gump wears? Because it felt like a very conservative film. Yeah.
I think it's very mainstream. This is how I would characterize this film as mainstream commercial magical realism.
Right. Okay.
But for me, that's the tag. And the thing that's impressive about it to me is it pulls it off. I think it kind of succeeds with. It's maybe magical realism light, Lite, but there are these fantastic moments. The running scenes, or all the way he just accidentally gets involved with various presidents or various iconic events. Speaking on the mall in the Vietnam War era protest, I guess he's actually unknowingly he's speaking out against the war. So I think it weaves all those things together believably, in a way that, like, Beau Is Afraid has all these things that are unbelievable and doesn't really bother to weave them together. At least these are woven together and it's coherent.
It is coherent, yeah.
So for me, I think this is kind of a conservative nation to begin with. So it does have a very positive nostalgia for a lot of things that aren't necessarily worth nostalgia. For example, all those Nike shoes are created in China with child labor. They don't go into that detail exactly, do they? But we do, or the shrimping is kind of maybe the problems they're having are not based on weather or bad luck, but overfishing or something like that. So they're not. I think Americans love to not see the real. So that's why this magical realism kind of works for the American audience, and I think it just works as a film, and it's just. It's very accessible. I find this film super accessible, very commercial, but it's still kind of good. I kind of liked it. Are you familiar with Zelig, the Woody Allen film?
I am, yes. Okay. So I had seen that, and that does much the same thing that this film does, doesn't it? By inserting Woody Allen into lots of little bits of historical footage.
Yeah. So I thought of this as a Zelig for the common man, whereas Zelig is sort of hanging around with intellectuals and artists and thinkers, and unfortunately Adolf Hitler. Seems kind of appropriate now for Woody Allen, but cancelled. Forrest hangs out with Bear Bryant, the football coach at Alabama, and the Nike people or others. I mean, he's not hanging out with intellectuals or that lot. So I think of it as a Zelig for the common man for that reason. The soundtrack is awesome. I mean, I found myself just pumping my fists with some of those 60s tunes and 70s tunes, and I think it captures that. And a lot of that's the undercurrent is that music, which is kind of subliminal to the film. You're hearing it, but a lot of those songs are definitely countercultural, definitely revolutionary, and by no means mainstream at the time. I mean, it's popular music. It's become popular, but I think there's that bit of sort of revolt, which is under the surface of the main bits of the film. But I think it's... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that the other film that I kind of jotted down as another touchstone, besides Zelig, is Being There, the Peter Sellers film from 1980, I think. Yeah. Because that also has that vibe about, someone with supposedly very low intelligence handing out these little bon mots of wisdom. Mm-hmm. I did a bit of research on the book. There's many episodes in the book that don't feature in the film. Mm-hmm. So, Forrest, he becomes an astronaut, he gets captured by cannibals, he becomes a wrestler, he has an orangutan for a friend. There's a whole bunch of things, but one of the things that happens in the book is that he runs for the Senate, which I think is, it is kind of, that's the note that Being There ends on, isn't it? I think. That's right.
Yeah.
So, it feels like it covers some of the same ground as Being There. We watched it on Apple TV, and the little blurb that you get at the bottom of the screen when you're queuing it up, ready to watch, calls the film like a fable. And I think that's the word that I would use for it. It's a fable, isn't it? It's kind of, it's a metaphor. And there's, and Forrest, he's a good character, but there's not a great deal, I think, inside him, so much so that he can kind of stand for anything. So I came away at the end thinking, if it's a fable, what does Forrest Gump stand for? Is he a stand-in for post-war America? Because he believes in the best. He's well-meaning. He's kind of misunderstood by others, by the international community. He's dismissed until he proves that he can beat the world at anything and everything. And then I read that, maybe Forrest Gump is supposed to be Christ. He's always kind of doing the right thing. He's refusing to be corrupted by others. He sacrifices his own interests for others. Maybe that's what he's supposed to be. Is he supposed to stand in for innocence? He's kind of simple, but he's sort of powerful, and he's loving, and he's unstoppable. He's such a kind of elemental character that he works as the protagonist of a fable. Whereas if the film is more realistic, I think there would have to be more flaws to Forrest Gump the character before I could buy it.
Yeah, I like your argument that it's more of a collection of fables. That's valid, which is interesting because we've just talked about Beau Is Afraid being this sort of collection of stories that don't piece together, whereas this is possibly a collection of fables that do piece together into one film. I think more than anything else, though, I think you early on said, is he a stand-in for post-war America? And I think that's really what it is.
Right.
And sort of this, at least in our own eyes, true or not, an innocence of America. And for me, I feel like, and I'm going to come back to the motherness too, because the mother is the film in both cases this week, I think. I think it's about embracing sort of the motherness and the nurturing aspects of America ultimately, because he's growing up, there's fatherlessness, right? I mean, he's fatherless, Beau's fatherless. I think America to a certain extent is fatherless. We don't really understand what those original founders meant starting the country, and I think a lot of us misunderstand it. I think we had wealthy land-owning people put together a constitution that sort of ensures that they stay in power. So we have to overlook that, and I don't know if we willfully do it or we ignorantly do it. However it happens, we have this idea that we're innocent in some way, and I think this is like an era of, you're kind of in between the wars. I guess he's born 50s. He must be born in the 1950s or something like that.
Very beginning of the 50s.
Yeah, I mean, he's a baby boomer. So you were talking about this being a boomer film. I would say that for him to get to Vietnam by 1970 or whatever it is, he was probably born in 52, 55, somewhere in there, right? So I think this is sort of a boomer film, post-war, post-World War II. America kind of is feeling its oats and all that, but really still not acknowledging. I mean, there's definitely some examination of race and racism and the Black Panther movement, or rising in response to that. There's some mention of that, but there's not a whole lot of understanding or investigation of the darker side of America, I guess. These great corporate enterprises like Apple and Nike coming into their own. Great football, of course, these sorts of things. So it's not really touching on anything that's dark. It's a safe film, right? But I think it has to do with sort of this America that doesn't really understand its origins very well, is growing, is sort of coming of age, but I think his mother stands in for like probably what America needs a little bit more of. So I think he is sort of, I wouldn't say Christ character, but he's a good guy. Forrest, he's an everyman, I think, and there are a lot of traits of his that you could follow and be a successful human being. So I think that is it. I think he's standing in for America, kind of an incomplete America, starts out on weak legs or whatnot, gets strong, can actually run across the country 5 times or whatever it is, and then procreate. Did I mention the procreation? Yes, of course.
Without dying, yeah.
Without dying, unlike the Northmen. Ooh, and it features someone we're going to mention a lot from now on, Tom Hanks. Did I mention Tom Hanks is in this film?
Tom Hanks is in this film. This is like Tom Hanks's first serious role, I think, interestingly. I think this is what really kind of pumped him up the Hollywood ranks, isn't it?
I don't know.
Before this, he'd been a comedian. He started out, am I right? He started out as a stand-up? And then I think the first place I'm aware of him was in, he was in Splash, wasn't he? He was in Big.
Yep.
He was in Punchline.
But I think
these are all kind of comedy roles. And then, it's kind of fairly early on. This predates Philadelphia, I think, doesn't it?
Oh, I would have said that this is after Philadelphia.
Oh, is it? Ah.
But yeah, then of course he gets into the sort of the romantic comedies with Meg Ryan come a little bit after this, perhaps. Let's do a quick...
okay, I think we should go to the internet.
Let's be honest with our listeners. Sometimes we just go to the internet and we type in maybe, I don't want to put in just Philadelphia because that would give me probably the city of, but Philadelphia film is 1993, which I believe comes before 1994.
I eat my words, yes. Oh, I eat my words.
Thank you, internet. Oh my God. Internet just made me smart.
What we should have done was ask ChatGPT, because that probably would have lied to us, and then I might have won the argument. My son had a very interesting reaction to this film. He's obviously a far more sophisticated film critic than me. We'd kind of walked the dog the day after we'd watched Forrest Gump, and I asked him, what did he think of the film? He's 13, and he said, basically it's a film about 2 people who have a bad start in life. That's what he said. And one of them is a woman, and she goes on to have a terrible life, and she gets used by everyone around her. And the other one is a man, and he goes on to have a great life. He can't stop winning.
Ah,
jeez. And I thought, yes, you're kind of right. Actually, I'm not. I don't know whether the film gives women a raw deal, or whether it more saliently observes that women are even less empowered in mid-20th century America than men with disabilities.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned about kind of the Black Panthers appearing. Yeah. That there is like this one Black Panther character who's he's played as a little bit of a shouty joke, isn't he? He shouts some stuff and he has like a couple of lines and that's it. We never see him again. And I wonder whether if you are black and you are watching Forrest Gump, the thing that riles you a little bit is that, as we saw in the Baz Luhrmann film in Elvis stole an awful lot from black musicians, but according to Forrest Gump, the thing that Elvis stole from is a white kid from Alabama, and there was no necessary influence from black dance or black culture in Elvis's kind of appropriation. It was just he was a white kid with braces on his legs. Yeah. So I can see there may be some people who wouldn't be super comfortable with the way that this film handles all the controversies of mid-20th century America.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, I don't think it wants to. I don't think it wants to look at that dark side. But I think your son's right, though, in terms of this is a film about America, and in America the women are weaker. And certainly in the era of this film where it's set, I think blacks definitely had less power. And it's, the portrayal of the Black Panthers is a little harsh for sure.
It's unnuanced, I suppose.
Yeah. So this is, it's a very white film when you think about it. I mean, there's Bubba's family, and then he sort of plays a white savior. He comes down and sells the business or gives them these huge checks and such.
There is also this question that Forrest Gump is kind of guilty of one of the same sins that I think Beau is afraid of, which is that Forrest is not a tremendously active protagonist. He also largely does what he's told. Yeah. He hasn't got a great deal of agency. He has more will than Beau in Beau Is Afraid, but otherwise, largely, he just does what he's told. It just happens that he does what he's told very well. Mm-hmm. He's told to run, and it turns out he's brilliant at running. He's told to dismantle and rebuild an assault rifle, and he's very good at it and does it quickly. Yep. But this film, in the same way that the film loves the army and it hates the counterculture, this film really believes that doing what you're told is good. And the person who is a bit countercultural and the person who goes against the norm is Jenny, and it all ends very badly for her. So she should have just done what she was told. Mm-hmm. I'm probably being unnecessarily cynical. It is a sweet film. I did feel more moved than I expected to, actually, and it does pull on your heartstrings. This film, it's very effective at what it does.
Yep. That's why I'm not going to say it's a great film. It's a good film. And I like having this conversation because I think it's about America as America wants to see itself, and definitely not about America as we actually are. So in that way, I don't know if that's intentional or not. I suspect not. I think you're trying to sell a film. I think it's commercial. And it's got happy endings to a certain extent. People die at the end of the act 2 or something like that. It follows a lot of the American storytelling themes or maps, I guess, as well. So in that way, it's good. I think, I loved a lot of the music. The soundtrack I thought was really great, but then the score I did not like at all. It was really, and maybe that was because there was a lot of money spent getting rights to all these great songs, but the actual score was kind of stringy and sappy, whereas
it is sappy.
The rock and roll was great. Just hearing all that rock and roll was fantastic. So,
well, speaking of Americans wanting to see themselves, we ought to play Who Am I? And see who we saw as ourselves on screen. Let's play Who Am I?
Oh, I like this one. This week I kind of like it.
Who am I? So I got to start out by saying that
go ahead.
For a rare occasion, this film, Beau Is Afraid, features a doctor or a therapist, and I do not feel like I am that guy.
Nathan Lane? What are you talking about? That's exactly what I wrote down. Jimmy is Nathan Lane.
What? No, who is like the therapist that he speaks to, who gives away all of his secrets to his mother and records the sessions and sends her the tapes? I'm not that guy. I do not identify with that guy. Who did you think you were in this week's 2 movies?
In this one, okay, Beau Is Afraid. I've decided I was any one of the pointless actors doing amateur theater in the woods with no audience whatsoever. That's who I was.
The guy in the enormous ladybird costume. Yeah.
Anyone of those just making theater for no reason whatsoever. That's me. In Gump, I was probably, and I'm trying to change, honestly, Lieutenant Dan with his defeatist non-growth mindset. Oh. But he eventually gets some new experiences and literally regains his footing, his standing. Did I give away the fact that he loses his legs?
No. Oh, puns. I do like a pun.
He's back up on 2 legs by the end of the film. So I think that's that's who I am. And yourself? Tell me.
Well, I think I'm not sure whether I'm slightly sheepish or proud to say. Having been moved by Forrest Gump, I saw a little bit of myself in Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Insofar as, I really identify with being in a social situation and not quite understanding the thing that's going on.
Yeah.
I have done that many times. I was telling Rachel a while ago, I remember when I was just after I'd left school, and I went to visit some of my brother's friends in San Francisco. And as I arrived, I was walking up the streets now, is it Berkeley or Berkeley? How do you pronounce that?
Berkeley, California?
Berkeley.
Yeah, Berkeley.
So I was in Berkeley, trying to find this kind of apartment where my brother's friends were living. And this woman, who I now, in retrospect, clearly realise was a sex worker trying to encourage me to have a good time for $60. This woman stopped me on the street and she said, "Did I have change for $1?" Because and I remember at the time absolutely taking her at face value and dishing out finding 4 quarters in my pocket and handing her over, and I can still picture her face as she was saying, "Geez, really?" It was only sometime afterwards I realised, no, actually I was being propositioned there, wasn't I? Oh, yes. Oh, right. Okay. So, yes, there is a little of Forrest Gump in me. Socially awkward are us. Yes.
I'm glad you questioned the pronunciation of Berkeley, because I think it is Barclay originally, because it's named after the philosopher who, I'm trying to make a connection here. I don't know if we talked about this on pod or off pod.
This is Gnarls Barkley, who had that hit song a few years ago?
No. Gnarls Barkley. No. Or Charles Barkley, the basketball player for whom Gnarls Barkley is named, I think. No. I forget Barkley's first name, but I believe he's the one who said, who pondered if a tree falls in the forest. Did we not talk about that on this pod, or is it?
We did. I can't remember if we were recording when we said that or not.
Maybe off mic. Yeah. I just wanted to bring that back because I think you do pronounce his name.
If people make an intelligent philosophical reference on a podcast, but they weren't recording, did it happen at all?
As long as you mention Tom Hanks's name, it happened.
We are hoping that the algorithm will pick up that we've mentioned Tom Hanks 200 times in this podcast and somehow get us into the feed of all those Tom Hanks fans out of there. Okay, let's do our synthesis. We'll see if we can bring these two films together. I think we've already done half the work, but let's see if we can dot the I's and cross the T's.
Just clean up at this point. Right?
So, you kind of pointed out, like these are two films about single men and their mothers, aren't they? Like, the big difference is that Forrest, is supported by his mother, in any way she can, and whereas Beau is, manipulated and thwarted by his. But I think for this reason, I think these two films they're like two sides of one coin. I think they go together very well.
Yeah, well, I think they're protagonists who grew up without their fathers, right? Their origin stories involve an absence of one of the originators in the sense that the fathers aren't in the picture. And for Beau, we don't even know if he survived consummation or impregnation or whatever you want to call it. With Forrest, what do we know about the father? I think he disappeared.
He disappears. He definitely doesn't turn into a giant penis monster in the attic. We know that much.
No. So their origins are somehow in doubt, or... does that make them lesser characters somehow? I'm not really sure. It's like there's a deficit to both of them, right?
Yeah.
For Beau, it's kind of this mental illness or these mental troubles. For Forrest, he can't walk for some reason until he's told to run, as you mentioned earlier. So there's this automatic pull to the mother in both cases. So I think that's a very important theme. And I don't know. Do you think Beau Is Afraid in any way picks up on Forrest Gump? Is he's trying to remake Forrest Gump or something like that? I don't know.
Well, I mean, clearly Ari Aster will have seen Forrest Gump, because who hasn't? I think both these films, they're kind of retellings of the Odyssey, aren't they? They both feature kind of lone men. They're traveling great distances and encountering great challenges in the hope of returning home to a significant woman in their lives, aren't they? I mean, the Odyssey is such an eternal story. I realise that people will slightly tell us off for saying that we are very Western-centric in citing our influences, but the Odyssey it's reused and retold again and again and again. I think these are both films that owe their basic structure to the Odyssey. And
well, there's one interesting thing in the sense that there's no way Beau is reproducing after his one sexual encounter, whereas Forrest does, and some would say that the Odyssey is sort of like a salmon story as well, where you're running up river to reproduce and then you die. Oh God, that's terrible. So that's, in some ways, that's more Beau's story. What is the one, Cold Mountain? Was that That was a decade ago, maybe 20 years ago. Sort of very similar story where the Jude Law character is just on this crazy trip coming home from the Civil War, ends up hooking back up with...
is it Nicole Kidman?
Nicole Kidman, thank you, or her character, of course. And he too is able to reproduce at the very end. So there is this life and progeneration sort of theme to some of those Odyssey stories. I don't know that the original Odyssey has that, because Odysseus comes back quite an old man, and his dog recognizes him. I don't know if his wife does, but
I think his wife is surrounded by suitors, isn't she? I think his wife is clearly still got it. In the Odyssey. Yeah. So I'm guessing.
Coming home to mother.
Yeah, it's not out of the question that.
Yeah.
the other kind of thing that compares. So we talked about kind of Forrest Gump as as a kind of political film, or at least it can have a political interpretation. There's not a lot of political sensibility to Beau Is Afraid, I think. So I'm kind of asking myself, does it say something about racism? No. Does it say something about feminism? Kind of not really. It's about Freud. Does it say something about socialism? No. But I think Beau Is Afraid does try to say something about the disintegration of society, maybe.
Yeah.
Or it's kind of Beau Is Afraid is a film about the self, I think, while Forrest Gump is a film about an entire nation.
Precisely. Yeah.
Beau is and I suppose today we live in the age of the self. I mean, it's not very long ago, but things are surprisingly different today to how they were in 1994, nearly 30 years.
Yeah.
I don't know whether films feel they have as much responsibility to examine society as they once did. It's a very kind of internal film. It looks in the mirror and not out of the window, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think
Forrest Gump looks.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Maybe it looks out of the window. Maybe it kind of looks at the TV. Forrest Gump looks at the newspapers.
Yeah.
Whereas kind of Beau Is Afraid, looks in like the camera on your smartphone, which is pointing at you and made for the selfie.
Yeah.
That's where that film is looking.
I think the far more personal story is Beau Is Afraid, and I think that's a mistake. I think when it does look at America, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty good film. Those opening scenes in the city are pretty good, I think. Some takes on suburbia are kind of interesting. But it ends up being too much about Beau and his psyche, which is odd to say about a film. But you said he was a very inactive protagonist, and it's not a strong enough character to be a great psychological story, I don't think. It's just sort of a battered man. Whereas I think Forrest Gump is far more about America. It's, he's a pretty easy character to relate to and to sympathize with, and we like him, so we follow his story. But it's so much about the United States as well, and his trying to sort of just keep in touch with Jenny and bring her into his life. So I think it's Beau is more personal. And I think that's a mistake somehow. I mean, it could have been a great film as a personal film, and I think its best moments are kind of when it is about America, because it's a much more honest America, probably. The medication stuff, the homelessness, the violence, the knifings, the random murders, and all that. I mean, that's America, and I like that fact. I wish it were more like that. Honestly, I wish it were a darker film. And Forrest never tries to be dark. It never really looks at the underbelly of America, but it's just a more accessible film as a result. And America becomes sort of the big character, I think.
They really are two sides of the same coin, aren't they?
They
Absolutely.
Really are. Yeah.
You can't see both sides at once.
Yeah.
Good pairing. Good pairing. I think they belong together. Absolutely. I think between the two of them, you get a fuller picture. Okay.
Yeah. What two films belong together on our next pod, where we talk about Tom Hanks and two other films?
Funny you should mention. No Tom Hanks movies next time.
Tom Hanks doesn't need to be in it. He just needs to be mentioned on the podcast.
Song speak. Yes, we just need to crowbar his name in randomly. So next time around, we are going to watch Are You There, God? It's Me, Tom Hanks. And we'll see whether we can somehow squidge Tom Hanks into the discussion somehow. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about what's also been playing at this theatre.
Oh, that's right. I missed a step there. I don't think I saw anything in the theater.
You didn't see anything this week?
I saw films. I did not step into a movie theater.
Oh.
And I kind of got into...
Also playing on this streaming service, it should be called.
Okay, yeah, perfectly. Well, I'm glad it's on a streaming service because, as I said before, I don't know that I can sit down and watch this film in one sitting.
Right.
It's the Alejandro Iñárritu film. It's Bardo and something about a handful of truths. Have you heard about it? It's on.
I have not.
Went right to Netflix. I don't think it had a theatrical release. Maybe it did. So it's sort of. I know at some point we're going to watch Fellini. We have to.
Right.
It feels like a Fellini. It feels like his 8.5. I'm not going to recommend it to anyone yet, in part because I haven't really been through much of it. But it has a lot of the excesses of Beau Is Afraid so far, and not a really strong story. And I'm not enjoying it, but I probably will watch it. I've seen most of his films. But I was really I watched actually a documentary on our Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, which means nothing to the UK audience, I don't think, but...
Well, not a great deal, but I have read a little bit about him in the news. Not much of it very good.
So it's just a public television, sort of like the BBC, producing a documentary on Clarence Thomas and his wife Ginny Thomas, who are two characters who really have a sort of a heavy hand in American politics when they really shouldn't have them. But my brother turned me onto this because Ginny Thomas went through this, it's a human potential program called LifeSpring. I don't know if you had these programs in the UK. You guys are too smart for this, where people get together and they celebrate the power of themselves. There are things called EST and Landmark, LifeSpring.
Right, celebrating the power of yourself. That's not something that ever happened in the United Kingdom.
I don't think so, no. So they're kind of like these self-help group things that happen in hotels. And I went to one of these things, a graduation for LifeSpring once. And it really feels culty. And actually, I just listened to a podcast called Good Cult, which has too many advertisements, and not enough of them are spoof advertisements. You know what's great about Two Real Cinema Club? You hear advertisements here that you will not hear anywhere else.
Funny that.
Yeah. This guy has some advertisements, too many advertisements, and it really interrupts the story. But I've been listening to this podcast on LifeSpring because decades ago, I started a musical theater production. I was writing a show based on LifeSpring.
Awesome. Oh, hey.
And then I just jotted down some titles for some of the songs that I'm going to write. And I got all excited about writing this again. So the Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas thing turned me back onto an old musical project that I've always wanted to complete. So I've been listening to podcasts and watching that Bardo film and thinking about LifeSpring.
Man, that's a musical I want to see. You got to finish that.
I've got
this week. You know, I always bring the lowbrow to this podcast.
I brought no brow just now.
Last weekend, we all sat down as a family and we watched Time Trap, a super low budget 2017 film, which I have now watched twice. As you know, I have a real weakness for kind of cheap, cheesy science fiction films because occasionally I manage to foist them on you for the pod.
Yeah.
This is a low budget, very cheesy time travel movie. So made kind of like 6 years ago.
Okay.
And there's two things about it which I really love. So I just watched it on my own a year or so ago, and then persuaded the family, we should watch this. Come and watch this together. One of the two things I love about it is that it is 90 minutes long, and not a moment longer. It's exactly the right length for a feature film. It clips along, and does not waste its time. Gets through plenty of story nice and quickly. Keeps things moving. And the other thing I really enjoy about it is that. I love a time travel film. I'm such a sucker for a time travel film. We'll always try and watch one, whether it's good or bad. It's one of my absolute favorite things. And in this film, it's about a cave in some remote part of the US. And once you go in the cave, time speeds up massively. So you can see the sun flashing past through the outside, the opening of the cave, as days and then years go speeding by while you are trapped in the cave trying to get out. And they do squeeze the absolute maximum they can out of this story idea. Nice. It is full of ideas. Some of them great ideas, some of them crazy, ridiculous ideas, but it absolutely squeezes the maximum out of it. Great fun.
Oh, good.
Cheesy, low budget, good fun.
Great. Any actors that I should recognize, or
no? One.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Yes, it is so low budget. I think my daughter did recognize one of the principals in it, who I think has then been in a mermaid television series, something like that.
Okay.
No, it's written and directed by Mark Dennis and Ben Foster. I'm not aware of anything else that they have done.
Okay.
It's a little kind of not sure it got a theatrical release. It's on Netflix in the UK at least, but yeah. Low budget, good fun little movie.
And they just go into a cave. Is that correct?
That's it exactly.
That's such a.
It's like it's 5 no-name actors in a cave. It's like how cheap can this be? It's cheap.
I gotta say that the one time slightly time travel script that I've written also happens more or less in a cave or a bunker, and it just seems like a different world. It's enough. You don't need a whole lot of mumbo jumbo to create the time travel. You just got this one place where something weird happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. That's not so bad. That sounds good, Jimmy. That's not lowbrow.
It's good fun, but temper your expectations. Right. So, Tom Hanks. It's been a great pleasure doing this Tom Hanks podcast. Tom Hanks. Join us next week when we're going to be talking about something a little bit more serious. We'll talk about Adele Hanel next week at the Popcorn Counter. But for tonight, we will return in 2 weeks with Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Until then, I hope the world outside your window is more like Forrest Gump and less like Beau Is Afraid.
Yeah, that's definitely a well wish for everyone out there.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye, Tom.